What do you think of Russian market?
I've argued forcefully that Russia, compared with other markets, is a good one for sales, profits, receivables, and quality of HR. So I think those three factors, short term, 22-23, will help the consumer product companies and the retail. Promotions and discounts is the consumer equivalent of cocaine, because I think globally we're not going to crash next year, but we're going to soften.
But before we begin, a quick shout out to our partner, ImShop. This company creates the best out-of-the-box mobile app solution for retail and e-commerce. They are cost-effective, fast-start omni-channel solution with open integrations. I worked with them and I can assure the quality. imshop.io. The link will be in the description below. So now back to the interview. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to DigitalVoice.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Thank you for finding time for us. So you are the president of the DT Global Business Consulting Company, am I right?
That's right, and we're an organization that focuses very much on Russia, which is our big baby, Central Europe, but also then on global trends, emerging markets. With Echo, we have 320 corporations in the group. Normally, I spend about 40% of my time in Russia, and I'm pleased to say I've come back this summer after COVID restrictions, and let's see where that goes. But we're hybrid like everybody, doing webinars and live events now.
The main field of DT Global is reporting and, business analytics and stuff like this. Can you tell a little bit more about what you're doing at DT Global?
Sure. I was trying to be short and staccato, so I'll go a bit longer. But I did my first TV interview 30 years ago or something, and they said, keep it short. And I answered, the first answer was 15 seconds. And they said something like, that was great. Can you do it shorter? So anyway, sure. Yes, Philip, and we provide an array of services and materials to our group members, and that includes business reports, hands-on. We do the economy as well, but it's very much sales, profits, strategy, corporate thinking. We do a variety of webinars, as I say, and live meetings now between 20 and 150 executives together. And I'm very pleased I'm also invited every week to make private webinars to management teams, global CEOs. And once again, I've started doing that in Moscow recently. And the mix of our clientele is consumer products, but then a wide array of industrial, B2B engineering, pharma, IT, and services.
So that means that you have a great, view of the market and what's happening not only in Russia but globally as well. I think the first question will be something that I'm sure a lot of people already asked you numerous amounts of time. How did the pandemic affect the global market and the Russian market in particular?
Yeah.
What trends do you see?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, like everybody, I think 15, 16 months ago as COVID kicked in, I thought it could be pretty cataclysmic and catastrophic for business, for societies. And certainly we avoided the worst case. And what happened through 2020, many group members and companies froze in the spring for a few days or a few hours. But they got through the spring and summer. And then, by the way, particularly in consumer products, across globally, but Central Europe and Russia, the consumer product market picked up. I saw a change in mood in companies around about the late autumn, October, November of last year, and companies were saying, wow, we might get out of this pretty well. In Russia, the results were pretty good. About 40% of companies did negative revenue growth, losses on revenue, but 50 to 60% actually recorded growth, revenue ruble growth in 2020. What's also, I think, interesting is that many consumer product companies, and I spoke to one this morning, and industrial companies, said, Danny, 2020 was a record year for our business in Russia or in global trends as well. Now, home consumption is one area where that's a fact as well. That's clear. E-commerce business and anything to do with providing those services. But household durables, kitchens, home appliances, anything to do with food consumption at home. Many of our group members, household names, did extremely well. We'll talk about it later, I know, but e-commerce also added another engine to profitable growth for many companies as well. 2021 was the recovery year, which we all expected, and that's gone well or very well again, globally and so forth. We've seen the boom, we've seen the opening from lockdowns. Russia, of course, had very minimal lockdowns anyway, but could be paying for that on the health side now, as we know. Now, when I'm talking with executives for global business and for CIMEA and Russia, everything is good, except consumer prices, input costs, producer prices. Everything that a company buys is expensive. That puts the cost base up. There's a limit to what people can do with price increases to the consumer, but they are raising them. So we're getting a position where producer input costs inflation is high. By the way, in Russia, it's at a 25-year high. And globally, it's also at a 20-year high as well. So that's the biggest negative for the majority of companies at the moment, their input costs, which includes human resources as well.
Okay, but if comparing Russian market to other markets, how is the Russian market recovering compared to others?
Yeah, I would say well, and by the way, I'll take a step back, Philip, too. Pre-COVID and during COVID and after COVID, but even pre-COVID, I've argued forcefully that Russia, compared with other markets, is a good one for sales, profits, receivables, and quality of HR. I think for 10 years and now, it's been better than Latin America, infinitely better than Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, better than the Middle East, because the Middle East took longer to recover from the downturn in 2015, and better than large parts of Asia. Now, admittedly, China is big, exciting, and sexy. We know that. But, Russia does compare. The other territories that compare reasonably well with Russia are Central Europe, Hungary, Poland, Czech, and Slovakia. So if you're the managing director for CE, Central Europe and Russia, I think you're in a good position. And in terms of the crisis, Russia has come out reasonably well, or quite well indeed. We're seeing 4.2% growth this year, plus maybe. And that's driven a lot by the oil price, but the global demand, as I said before, for commodities and input. Everybody wants metals, mining products, and so forth. Russia produces that. Russia's exports are at record highs, both petrol, oil, and gas, but non-energy exports are plus 55% at the moment from a decent level. And the current account, I don't want to be boring, but the current account is the balance of trade and finances. And this year, Russia's current account will be an all-time historic high record of about 125 billion. So it just shows that the money is pouring into the economy. The budget deficit is coming down and becoming a surplus this year, ahead of expectations. But if I may carry on for another 30 seconds or so, the issue, of course, the ruble, that wasn't impacting all that money on the ruble so much because the central bank was sterilizing. That's a fancy word for saying selling rubles to manage the volatility and to prevent over-strengthening of the ruble. Now, the bank has taken its foot off the pedal there a little bit in October. Combine that with easier geopolitical risk, and this explains why the ruble is at close to 70 to the dollar and going quickly down to 84, 83, 82 to the euro. So we've got better geopolitics and the bank's adapting its policy to all this money pouring in. If the bank didn't manage it to some extent, we'd have a ruble rate at 62 to the dollar and 72 to the euro. But we don't, and I don't think the bank will change its policy that much. But what I'm saying is the currency outlook consensus is pretty good.
So, but why do you think they don't do it? Because if the ruble will be around 70, 60, this will significantly drive the consumption, and a lot of people will go and spend their money on, buying electronics and
Yeah.
whatever.
True, true. And it would help inflation as well. But they're trying to do that through monetary policy on the interest rate side. So that you're doing, a couple of things. Their view, and your view is very well respected. I understand where it's coming from. Their answer is we don't want the ruble to be dictated by oil price and have that volatility. We want to iron that out. Then they have another argument, which is less convincing. An overstrong ruble holds back non-oil exports, manufacturing goods. But we both know that Russian manufacturing goods exports are limited, but that's the argument. And then the third point, which could be the killer one, managing the exchange rate means that the ruble revenues of the big energy people are attractive. And that means that, the lobby groups of the energy companies in Russia are very satisfied with this situation. So they're the answers. I'm not entirely convinced by the answers, by the way, but they are the answers to your question.
At least the official ones, right?
Indeed. And they're running the show, not you and me.
Sure, and that's good. But keeping in mind that they're running the show and we need to adapt to it, do I understand it correctly that industrial companies are the ones that benefiting most right now, getting out of the crisis, and given the fact that the income of regular people is not becoming like more, they're not getting more money, means that the retail companies are somehow struggling, or it's not true?
Well, that's a really good one. Thank you. There's a balance. I'd love to give you a clear answer, but I have to make it a bit complicated. B2B industrial is doing well because the money's flowing in. The gas, when Gazprom does well, Russia does well, and B2B industrial does well. It's like when General Motors does well, the United States does well. That was the mantra in the 1960s. And that's a truism today for Russia. So that is helping a lot. To move to the retail consumer side, it's more complex. And I'll take the retail side first in a way. Several years ago, as you know, 5-7 years ago, the Russian consumer was premium orientated brand and had a reasonable amount of disposable income. So it was a brand focused market, and many, the consumer product companies selling via retail did well, and they were happy. We've got good, expensive products. We got cheap ones, but we can sell a lot of branded products in Russia and make good profits. That was the model. But then about 5 years ago, retail and suppliers, they came to some sort of devil's combination regarding promotions and discounts, because the Russian consumer started to get tired round about 2018, and not as, they were resilient for many years when, by the way, Western companies imposed a lot of very strong price increases in 15, 16, 17. And the companies kept saying the Russian consumer is resilient. But one day, of course, that consumer got tired, and then they had to be attracted by promotions and discounts. And of course, what's happened is a massive swing. I was talking, Philippe, to one of our consumer product companies, Food, this morning, who simply said the promotions and discounts in Russia have destroyed the market. Now, that's an extreme comment, but 50%, of FMCG product at least is sold promo discount in Russia. Cosmetics is 60% plus, and alcoholic drinks, whiskey, rum, and so forth, 70-75%. And this is not going to diminish. The suppliers and the manufacturers and the retailers want to get away from it, but they can't. And that's the challenge moving forward. And of course, the retailers want more own label. And of course, the Russian retailers, they're competing now for consolidation. They're moving out into the Russian region. They've been doing this for several years, as you know, going to the Russian regions, but they've been doing more. And the flip side of that is that regional retail groups have been getting stronger, Siberian ones and so forth. And they've been expanding in their regions and now coming to Moscow. and so forth. So there's a lot of stir and volatility there. But I'll take this question a bit further to a next stage. It's a big global trend and a very big Russian trend. The first thing is affordability, to your point, I'll come to wages and incomes in a moment. But globally, everybody wants value for money and affordability, and in Russia, and that's understandable. 80% of the companies I work with say that. So affordable, cheap, promotion, discount, low level, fine. But in Russia, the last 2 years with COVID, and before it was a trend, premium and super premium, luxury is doing well everywhere. And in Russia, one of my companies in the coffee sector summed this up. They said, Danny, we've got two segments doing very well: affordable and cheap, and super premium. And the conclusion, I'm sorry, Philippe, is in Russia and the world, the rich are rich, stay rich and buy rich. The poor are poor and stay poor and buy poor. A consequence of this is that a mid-range, mid-price, mid-label is under pressure. And many of my clients say, Danny, you're absolutely right. This is brutal there. It's better to be up or down. However, some companies, kitchen appliances, say, Danny, that's correct. But with extra effort, you can make the mid-range work. But we agree it's harder work, price sensitivity, route to market, marketing, and so on has to be very sophisticated to make the mid work. So I think promo discount is a big dynamic for retail and suppliers. And this bifurcation, polarization of the consumer market in Russia is a very big dynamic.
That's very interesting. But how does the global markets, global manufacturers, retailers are looking at the Russian market then? So where does it put Russia in terms of investment or opening their business here or expanding their business here?
Yeah. Well, there's a historical answer and then the actual one, and the history as we know, and I've been looking at this for 25, 30 years. The market, as I say, for many years, it's been a roller coaster sometimes with the famous crises. But when Russia's not in crisis, the consumer's doing well and spending. And our consumer goods companies, but other ones, industrials, have done well. So if you look at Russia for 20 years, it's been a good run on sales, profits, and receivables, as I said before. But the perception of companies, Western ones and especially American, has been prejudiced and negative against Russia. I think sometimes it's valid, but sometimes it's excessive, extreme, and an ignorance of the market. And I think we've seen that recently with the political risk element. So I'll move forward now. But you've got this prejudice and antagonism against the Russian market, more than against China, although China, of course, is now becoming a bad boy as well. So, but 3 years ago, 10 years ago, China was, the place to be, and boring, the big bear of Russia and the sexy Mandarin of China. That was the contrast. But now I think, many companies, as I said before, the FDI, foreign direct investment, is down heavily. And that was a function of geopolitics, the financial markets looking at Putin, and the threat of sanctions. I think, and I've argued, and I think I was right, the last 2-3 years, the sanction threat was overplayed. The sanctions we have will not be removed. The US ones, not for decades. The European ones, not for many, many years. And it's impossible to see at the short term a working solution on Eastern Ukraine or Crimea. I can imagine one where you can find a resolution, Eastern Ukraine must go back to Ukraine, but they could find a form of words on joint sovereignty, etc., for Crimea, blah, blah, in some way. But I think the current regime in Russia would never find that acceptable, so we're stuck where we are. But the point is, Philippe, I don't see last year, this year, next year, the future, increased sanctions. The American Congress is too busy with other things, and the Europeans and Germany wants Russian gas, Nord Stream. So the Germans will never impose, or hardly ever impose, any sanctions, new ones, on Russia. The financial markets have seen this. And this is a factor of why we see the strengthening of the ruble along with that. And providing there's no foul up or major self-inflicted accidents politically, I think the outlook is steady. Let me also qualify that remark. Putin and Biden met in Geneva, and they came to a sort of a working compromise. It's not a love affair or a romance. It's just, live and let live, keep out of my hair, I'll keep out of your hair kind of relationship. The Americans, by the way, are very focused on China, and they want to get everything moved out of the way geopolitically. And I think that's a function of that. And that gives Russia a bit of breathing space. So at the moment, the perception is low, but because business in Russia is good, the outlook is reasonably good. Companies are looking at more diversification geographically. They're looking at their supply chains globally, and they're looking more brutally short term, where can we make money? And that's overcoming now, or it might do, some of that resistance or reticence that they had regarding Russian politics.
Okay. So moving from politics to more of a business side of things. I cannot avoid the question of online sales. So, what do you think is the role of the online sales after the pandemic in this new world globally, and maybe you see any trends particularly for Russia?
I think the global trends, like many things, like with climate change, China is the big baby. I've forgotten the exact numbers. You probably know them as well with me, but Russian e-commerce sales now are probably, depending on the definition, between $30 and $38 billion per annum. Some of the European markets, Italy, France, Germany, are 80 to 120 billion. The US is something like 500 billion approximately, and China is 2 trillion. So e-commerce in the world today means business in China. I exaggerate, but you could almost argue that. But when you look at Europe, and certainly Central Europe and Russia, the numbers and the trends are quite similar. I found that interesting. Pre-COVID, e-commerce as a percentage of total retail sales, pre-COVID, was approximately, for most of Central Europe and Russia and Ukraine, 25, 30 markets, was about 3, 4, 5, 6%. In Russia, nationally, that was a number. In Russia, of course, Moscow was 15 to 17%. So, and the capital cities are different everywhere. But let's say it was 5% in Russia and Central Europe. And with COVID at the height, it went from 5 to 15% as a proportion. And then with the opening up eventually of Russia quite quickly, and then Western Central Europe later, it went from 15 to 10. So 5 to 15 to 10, which still means a double of the proportion sold. And now we've surveyed our clients for Russia and Central Europe, and the trend is the same. We've got about 40% who say our sales growth in e-commerce, the next couple of years, will average annually 15 to 20%. And then you've got 40% who say it will be 20, 25% plus. Now that number is a lot lower than what we've had in 2020 and 21, when a good number of consumer product companies were growing e-commerce 100, 200, 300% from a low base. And just to share, this morning and previously, so 2 food companies have said, Danny, over the last 12 months, we've grown e-commerce 300%, and it represents 3.5% of our business today. So, from a tiny base. But as I said before, if you think that this is going to grow, and many do, at good double digits, and a consumer products traditional business in Russia, depending on category, will be lowest 5, 5, 7, 8, and then an average of 8, 9, 10, 11, good high single digits, low double would reflect the outlook for many consumer goods companies in Russia. But their e-commerce business, so traditional business 8 to 10, e-commerce 15, 25, 30. So over a 2, 3, 4 year period, this is going to be very important. And for Central Europe and Russia, the last number I have, Philip, is what proportion of companies expect to generate 20% of sales through e-commerce? So that's not 50% or 20%. It's a sizable part of the business. And at the end of 2022, 35% of our clients think they'll be generating more than 20% of revenue from e-commerce. So again, it's not a quintupling or a zillion percent more, but it's a big, nice, chunky increase.
Well, that's interesting. And so I guess a lot of your clients are coming to you and asking how they can grow e-commerce, what can they do about it, and a lot of them are actually basing their growth on this e-commerce thing. How do you perceive it? So you think that this is just clients who are now used to just a new type of service, the delivery, and these are the same clients, or this is a possibility for the brands to actually expand and grow, or these 20% are just a part of the same 100% that it was before the pandemic?
Haha, thank you very much. Yes. That would also depend on how you structure the business for e-commerce, and I'll jump to that. It's sort of answering your question. The majority of companies at the moment plan their e-commerce business as an integrated part of the existing business. And it might also involve, Ivan being head of marketing for traditional and head of e-commerce sales as well. Point number one, that's model one. Model two is a mishmash compromise, a matrix system, God forbid, where, traditional and e-commerce, but lines going across, functionalities between some of them, mixed or not mixed personnel, etc. A matrix to me always sounds a little bit disturbing, but people that they see that as a compromise, a halfway house. There are some companies, though, a minority, who say to hell with it, we will have a separate independent e-commerce business. And that can either be a nucleus within the company or it can be in a different physical, well, now we're working from home, but a different physical unit. And then also, but different KPIs, different budget, different targets, and different management. Or they can be different management reporting to the GM for all Russian business. You can do it whichever way you want. And that would impact on how you approach the market and route to market. But I think another factor coming from this is hybrid. Everything is hybrid, work from home and so forth. But route to market is also e-commerce. I talked there about the structure. Now it's more about the route to market and the channel. And it's going to have a big impact on the sales rep and sales force, I believe. And I think it's happening. We had a meeting in Moscow and in Vienna recently, and regional managers in Vienna were saying the sales rep model or sales force pre-COVID was questionable, and it's very questionable now. By the way, this started very much in pharmaceutical and health. The ironic joke is sales reps would go to the hospital, knock on the doctor's door, 20 times a day saying, buy our drugs, buy our drugs. I exaggerate, but it wasn't very sophisticated and it was pretty brutal. Now, of course, although there is movement in Russia, it is more digital. And doctors and hospitals have got overload. So pharma companies are saying we need to be more sophisticated, smaller, shorter webinars, etc., but fewer physical sales calls. And one executive for the region said recently to me, said, Danny, and I hear what he's saying, it's a little bit what I said about consumer products, the polarization. He said, look, key account managers, top-level sales relationship executives will be necessary in the next 5-10 years to keep our relationship building. We're also going to need a lot of junior kids to run the transactional stuff and the systems for digital and the fulfillment. But the middle chunk of our salespeople, what are they there for? Now, that could be an exaggerated effect, and it could take a longer period of time. Not a year, not a week, could take 3-5 years. But Companies are looking at their sales structure hybrid related to e-commerce very much.
So you mean that e-commerce and digital is moving into B2B, not only into direct to consumer B2C markets like retail, but also into B2B like
Oh,
pharmaceuticals?
absolutely. And also, that raises more challenges, I think, in a way. If I was doing e-commerce, I think in general, I joke, but there's a serious element to the joke. If you're doing e-commerce to consumer retail, it's easy. You just do Amazon. You become an Amazon, and you can fly to space overnight, apparently. So that's good. So that's B2C. B2B is more tricky. It's not 5 million consumers or 500,000 or whatever. It's 20, 50, 300, 1,000. And our clients complain, webinars, Zoom and that, they're fine for existing relationships for a year maximum. But then when you have innovation to existing clients or new clients, innovation, that's very tricky. And then also how to monetize. You can have a relationship, say, hey, it's nice to be in touch, in Omsk or Tomsk. But, how do we get money out of Omsk and Tomsk is the challenge. So the B2B people, I think, are struggling more with that. And I think a lot of the distributors and wholesalers in B2B, if I may say, it's a cliche or a prejudice, they're old school, old style, Boris, the distributor, he's been doing it for 40 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's built up his family company. He knows what to do. He used to drink a lot of vodka. I'm stereotyping. But, I have seen seriously some of the traditional distributors in Central Europe and Russia struggle with the hybrid and the digital. And they've got their old ties and their old school relationships, but they're struggling to build new ones. And some of my big B2B clients, in mining, heavy industry, they're reporting this trend. They're not changing it overnight, but they're also thinking, what do we do with our distributors, wholesalers, and our sales model as well? So it's affecting everybody.
Interesting. Actually, a quick question. Do you see companies right now after the pandemic, um, are they moving in their strategy to grab land share, to grab new clients, or their main agenda right now is the profitability and keeping afloat?
Yeah, wow. That's I was discussing that this morning with a food company, and we talked for an hour and a half or so, and the executive concluded by, "We're in a perfect storm." So I think the answer, Philip, it depends on the company, where they are, what market share they are, what products they're selling, and so forth. And it really is a real mismatch of everything. Some are fighting for market share and want volume. This morning, the conversation I had with the executive of a food company was, he was saying, my sales guys, they want to push out and get the volume, but, we've already come down in the profit margins. And I feel that, to try and get more volume, we're going to have to not increase our prices sufficiently to support the profitability, which is the challenge of, I said before, the producer costs are rising. There's a limit to what you can do with price increases. And most companies now say our profit margins are under pressure. So the automatic response from headquarters is, when that's happening, is protect that profit line. So that's one impact. But you've got then other companies who might be at a different spectrum or in a different sector. Household durables, they're growing, 35, 40%. E-commerce is booming and profitable. Let's go for more. Let's try and fight for market share. They accept, by the way, I hope the Russian managers do, but maybe not headquarters, 40%, 35% may not be sustainable, because I think globally, we're not going to crash next year, but we're going to soften. And we're already seeing that process. The inflation input cost is already making, markets wobble, and companies, it's taking some of the shine off the recovery for sure. And the mood and mentality is like that. But, business is good, but it's managing those expectations. And just a quick one, it was one of our apparel companies said to me, Danny, you know, this story, Russia is the most successful market in the world today in our company. We are the superstars of the company. But I joked with him on this theme. I said, you know, Ivan, you're at the very top of Everest. And when you're at the very top of Everest, there's usually only one way to go, and that's down. He laughed and said, Danny, I'm trying to manage expectations. So I think we're going to come down on the rate of growth, but, you know, as you say, the landscape to try and get those companies are still trying to grow both, you know, the volume and the price and the profit margin. But even for the good boys who are doing super well, this input cost challenge is the challenge. And a quick one, Philip, I think, you know, we all agree that this input cost and inflation is temporary. Everybody in the world agrees it's temporary, but it's the definition of temporary. I think the optimists, and I might be amongst them in some producer prices, Q1 of next year, which is not far away, we see the start of an improvement. But quite a few of my clients, and very much the logistics people, they say no, summer, autumn next year. So almost a year away from now before we start seeing improvements. And I accept on components, computer chips, electronics, and some logistics elements, it seems that it's going to take at least 2 or 3 quarters to see a good improvement. But if you're not super dependent on microchips from Taiwan, I think other elements of your business will survive. And a quick one as an exception, the Russian automotive industry, I'm informed, you know, the numbers are softening, but several of the companies I work with supplying it have said to me, Danny, globally and in Europe, the automotive industry is starting to struggle after surviving well. But in Russia, it's slowing, but it's surviving relatively better than Europe. That's because there's some Asian suppliers think that it's a good market, so they give priority to Russia. And interestingly, the Russian auto market, which is a bit smaller than Germany or France, is quite profitable. So the manufacturers and the suppliers talk together and they say, well, Russia's smaller, but it's profitable, so let's keep it going. So that's part of the answer to your profit volume story.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what can you name other than the digital transformation and moving to e-commerce, like the main key drivers for 2022 for retail business?
But just quick ones on the Russian consumer and therefore retail. It's not going to be easy, and we're going to have the promotion and affordable story I talked about. But remember, real wages and employment in Russia, point number one, are much better than we expected. Inflation is eating into wages, but they're still positive. So that's good news. The savings ratio, we all know globally, savings shot up. People have been spending it in Russia on mortgages, the real estate, cars, and the retail stock market, but they've been also buying consumer products and luxury items. They've probably got a leftover 5-6 billion, which is quite high by Russian standards. So wages and employment, second, savings, and thirdly, consumer credit in Russia is still growing at 20%. The central bank will try and bring that down next year to 12, 14, but it'll still be, low double digits and good. So I think those three factors, short term, 22, 23, will help the consumer product companies and the retail while they're doing all their, consolidation, price fighting, price wars, and so on. While that's going on, those are three underlying positive factors. To answer your question, though, Philip, I think, pre-COVID, I think we're going to get back to pre-COVID eventually. Not in everything, work from home, business travel, life will have changed fundamentally, and the way people look at health and their own attitudes. But pre-COVID, and I think Russia is going to go this route slower than other markets, but pre-COVID, the global consumer was strained and stressed. All the consumer companies I worked with were never satisfied with their organic top-line revenue growth. And they couldn't generate enough because the global consumer, US, Britain, Europe, Japan, Emerging markets were a bit better. But in the key markets, those people didn't have enough spending power. Their jobs were not good. Real unemployment, it was the gigification of the economy. People were outsourced. They had part-time jobs, temporary jobs, and so forth. Just one number for you. In 2019, British unemployment was 3.5%, one of the lowest in 40, 50 years. Marvelous. So you think, wow, the employment picture in Britain is fantastic. No, 50% of jobs, 50% were not traditional. So not working for a company, not working for the government. Part-time, temporary, or self-employed. And those people are more precarious. They don't have pensions and social security and health. So it makes them, in my view, weaker consumers. And I think globally, we're going to go back to that. By the way, this year and next year, power is with the staff and employees. You know about the boom in the HR market. People are in demand, digital people, truck drivers, everybody, is in demand, and salaries are creeping up. But I think automation, robotification, digitalization, gigification, companies managing their costs, and I think even work from home eventually will weaken the power of the employee. So I don't think we're going to have a wage spike lasting much more than a year. And I think then, so why am I talking about wages and employment? Because the employee or the non-employee is the consumer. So I think the outlook, to answer your question in finishing, is medium long term, it's going to be tough again. It was brutal before. We're going to see more consolidation in Russia. The price wars, promotion wars will not go away because promotions and discounts is the consumer equivalent of cocaine. I don't take cocaine myself. I take chocolates, by the way. I sniff chocolates and that kind of thing. But for the consumer, promo is the cocaine, and they'll never go off it. So I think retail and suppliers are trapped in that. So I think we're going to have a cost-cutting spiral. And the hard discounters, as you know, they are doing extremely well. Combine that with own label, and there's a tough time ahead. My last point on this topic anyway would be that still Russia relatively, I remember I talked about premium and doing well. I think premium and quality in Russia 5-10 years ago was much stronger than Western Europe and Central Europe. And today I would say it's a little bit stronger. So whatever the problems are on price and discount in Russia, it's not yet Bavaria or Northern France. But, everything is transitioning into that model.
So the middle is squeezing, the top is not as fruitful as it used to be, and the low end is growing crazy, right?
And brutal. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
that's might be good news for the top line, but never good news for the bottom line, right?
Yeah. And as we both know, companies have been in cost-cutting, cost efficiency mode since I came into business 35 years ago. And I'm not sure they can keep it up for another 35 years. They'll have to find another transformation. Maybe e-commerce will be it, but that provides price transparency, as we both know. And in a sense, it certainly cuts the costs of logistics, although you've got to deliver at the end of the day. But, you can do a lot of distribution and wholesaling savings. But, those will evaporate in 2 or 3 years or 4 years. And then, what's the next saving procedure?
Okay, so to finish it up, what are the main sins, the main mistakes to avoid for the retailer in 2022? I mean, like the main challenges that they might face and do a stupid mistake in following to it.
Yeah, I think to use some Tolstoy language, I think they've sinned already too much and there's no redemption. I think this big point is, they are going the route of the Western retail model. 5-7 years ago, Russian retail was not consolidated at all, which for the suppliers, the companies I work with, was tickety-boo. We got lots of small, weak retailers that we can dominate and tell what to do. But they've developed, they've become stronger and consolidated. It's still not as consolidated as the West, but it will go that route. Combine consolidation, increasing competition between the bigger blocks fighting each other. Combine that with the disruption temporarily of e-commerce for a few more years as people work it out. Do we do it ourselves? Do we do platforms? There's going to be a churn there. But I think underlying is it's beyond the power of the retailers and the suppliers. Just let's take a case in Britain. The peculiar Prime Minister, Mr. Boris Johnson, he's using now this thing about where wages are going up as though he's created this. But there is a political point here, and it's nothing to do with left or right. I often joke, that I'm a hardline communist because I want the proletariat to be rich, to have strong wages, to be confident and relaxed and satisfied in their work. Because I'm a hardline capitalist, because when you have those consumers, they will put their money in banks as savings and make the banks profitable, and they will use their other money to buy products from the companies we work with, and we have a benign cycle. And that requires fiscal policy, government policy, which we did not get after the financial crash. We got the reverse. We got austerity, and that crippled the consumer on top of everything else they had. So I think, Philip, the retailers and the consumer goods companies, they're trying to do their best they can in the environment they have, but they don't control that environment. I think the bottom line is what they need is, they need richer consumers. And, get to the government. Oh, and sorry, just to be quirky, the companies themselves, the stupid CEOs at the top of companies, they need to pay their workers more because your workers are your consumers. And if the government pays higher wages and the companies do, then you've got a different cycle. At the moment, it's, how much can we squeeze out of the bottom line? And as I say, it seems a cul-de-sac eventually. But this is big political, fiscal policy and so forth. We're in a tumultuous time on salaries and HR. But as I say, I tend to think we're going to get back to a strained global consumer in the future. Russia is maturing. Russia is modernizing. And that will bring, eventually these Western market challenges, which we face already in Moscow, for sure.
Okay, so let's make something of a brighter light by the end of the show.
So you want me to tell lies? Okay.
Yeah, please tell us sweet lies. Like, what do you think of Russian market? So, is there a future? Top line, is there a future development for the Russian market?
Absolutely. I am really. Some people think I'm naively optimistic about Russia. I'm not, but really. It's not so much an absolute argument, Philip, as a comparison. I said this at the start, yeah. Russia, I think absolutely is not a bad market at all in terms of top line sales and all these challenges we talk about. But you've got growth. One of our consumer product companies, he said, Danny, our profit margins are being really squeezed and crushed. But our profit margins used to be super profitable. And now they're only good. But of course, when you tell headquarters that, it's not a convincing argument. But it puts, Russia in perspective. And I think the ROI on Russian business was very good and remains very good. Another key point is the quality of HR, human resources. It's not as good as it was 15 years ago or 10 years ago. The Soviet educational system did a lot of good things, peculiarly, but it's not been around for a long time and we can't live on that. But the human resource quality in Russia is good. And during the crisis, by the way, this came over strongly. I knew it, and I knew it in the crisis. One of my farmer clients said, he's been working on Russia for 25 years. He's in Switzerland now, but he's been in Russia a long time. He said, Danny, I've always thought the Russian staff were fantastic and the best in the world. And during the crisis, they exceeded my super expectations. Now, I'm not saying every company says that, but honestly, I've had 200 companies tell me, that the staff have done well. Work from home is changing some dynamics and things, of course. But overall, again, when you're comparing with other markets, this is good. we're getting away a little bit from some of that geopolitical risk perception, which is helping the currency and will help the economy. So I think those are the positives. Russia just needs a better picture and a better promotion, and that will help a lot. I have to end maybe on a thoughtful note. I know, Philip, you're trying to get me there. That was the optimism. The thoughtful side, though, is, one of my IT clients, we're seeing globally regulation increase, pressures for localization and so on in the IT sector globally. We're seeing that, of course. China as well, not just Russia. China, Russia, US, Britain, everything is doing that. One of my IT clients in Russia, an American company, Automation, said our business is very good. We're very satisfied with the numbers, but the mood is not good. The mood this is the IT industry globally and in Russia. And I think the thoughtful part is that we don't have 1998 at the moment. It's not the Cold War militarily that we had, but Russia certainly is more detached or isolated from the West than it's been in a long time. I don't think that's necessarily the people, and it's not the youth, but I certainly think the political establishment is more detached now than it's been for 20, 25 years. And that's starting to have, balancing out the good side again. And so, as I said, perceptions have improved geopolitically. But as I said before, it's not a love affair between the West and Russia at the moment. Far from it. But let's be thankful we've got an adult relationship, and it takes two to tango. And President Trump is not around anymore, which I regard as a positive. But if I want to get you, I can always get negative though, Philip. I'm sorry, I must be a pessimist at heart. Trump could be re-elected in 2 years. The re-elected President Trump. That, and let me put Russia into context, the biggest political risk in the world today is the United States of America, in my view. There's no shadow of a doubt.
For Russia or globally?
For the world, and therefore it would entangle Russia. 46 million American adults believe that Donald Trump is the legitimate president of America today. 42 million, and this is shocking, believe the attack on Congress on January the 6th was justified. And this is a mentality and a psychosis that won't go away. There is a political civil war in America, and it's on the edge. And if Trump, there's a chance that Trump would run. There's a 50% chance he runs again, and a 49% chance he wins again. And if he does, I think the US is in severe trouble, and I think all of us then would fall into that. If you let me continue, geopolitically, I think China, for example, domestically, internationally, is one of the worst places it's been for 20 odd years or so. Business is strong and booming. It's wobbling a bit, but business is good. Russia, geopolitically, internally, externally, not in a good place. Business is good. The United States of America is in a terrible place politically. The stock market is booming. Amazon is $4,000 a share. Innovation is booming. People want to migrate to America all the time, etc., etc. In a way, you could almost argue, I think we need a bottle of wine for this, to say that geopolitics doesn't matter. Carries on. Now, for Russia, it did matter with the sanctions, because that was weighing down. So, and it matters for localization, protectionism, internationalization of business. So I'm not belittling it, but, it's an interesting concept.
Wow, Denny, thank you very much for the wisdom. Thank you very much for your thoughts. I think it is like a breath of fresh air for our listeners and viewers, because we're mostly about digital and e-commerce, and a little bit of politics, a little bit of view from abroad to our market is very, very useful.
Great.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure. And my last word is, as you know, Philip, I am a Russophile. I like Russia and the Russians. My daughter is called Natasha because I read War and Peace when I was 17, and my favorite book is Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. So, спасибо, всего доброго.
Спасибо, Denny.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank
Thanks.
you.